On the show today, I have Suman. I have known Suman since my high school days. Today, he's a research scientist at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'm so excited to have a really old friend on this show today. Welcome to the podcast, Suman.
Hey Vivek, thank you for having me on the podcast.
So, Suman, for the listeners of this podcast, can you just give us a flavor about where are you coming from? What do you do for a living? What's your journey?
Oh, that's a very deep question. No, I mean, first of all, I'm very glad that we connected, and it's good to see you doing well for so long. And so my journey, as just for the viewers, we met each other at I guess high school, middle school.
Yeah.
So I was born and brought up in Calcutta, and then did my schooling, and I wanted to go to be in engineering, science engineering, something like that. So I think I got into IIT Kharagpur after that, doing mechanical engineering, and so from there I got very interested in fluid mechanics. Research caught my attention, especially, and I kind of made up my mind that I should go in the direction of research. So when it was time for finding a job, we kind of I applied to different places. I did apply to a few jobs, but also outside abroad for PhD programs.
Mhm.
And there I kind of got a chance to do some work in biomicrofluidics at MIT with a young professor. So I had no idea of biology at the time. So I was like, oh, this sounds like fun and it'll be adventurous. So I went to MIT to do my PhD. It was initially tough, but very exciting. So I did initially my master's, then finished my PhD. And after that, I decided to do a postdoc in this particular lab I am in, which is Langer Lab. And yeah, I've been here since then. So moved after postdoc to being a research scientist, which is more of a semi-independent position.
Brilliant. Tell us a little bit about the lab where you are right now.
Right. Yeah. This is very interesting. So I work with two pretty big names in the field, Bob Langer and Daniel Anderson. And the idea that Bob has been kind of a pioneer of the field of bioengineering. So back in 1980s and 90s, I think he was the first people to kind of identify that you could kind of change the molecular structure of polymers to suit for drugs and pharmaceuticals. For example, he built the first slow release drug formulation that is used everywhere today. So he's really kind of created the whole field of drug delivery, tissue engineering, and many fields that we kind of know now as bioengineering. So it's a very famous but also a very big lab. We have about 110 people. It works almost like a little clockwork, like it's almost like a factory. You have a big guy. It's like there are small teams, and bring in grants and stuff. I think the budget is about $10 million. So it's a huge operation, and the fun thing in here is that you have all sort of flavor of people. Like there are physicists, there are engineers, chemists, biologists. So it's really kind of in a unique place on in research, because you can get all the resources you want and all the teams you want right under one roof. And so it's pretty exciting to take on tough challenges which needs multidisciplinary approach, and you solve them together.
Fantastic. Uh, you mentioned about the focus of the lab, especially the work of Bob Langer and Daniel Anderson around drug delivery. How did that happen for yourself? Like, were you destined to go into this space, or there are some experiences that you had that really shaped your thinking about getting into this field?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't, I think my trajectory has been kind of shifting constantly, and it's kind of shifted by um, my experience at present, or whenever. So just for example, when I was in grad school, before grad school, I didn't know what biology was. So we got in there in grad school, and one of the problems we were dealing with was how do we create small microfluidic devices, small chips that could sort blood cells. So that imagine somebody in a battlefield or in a third world setting where you need to do this test. You don't have very expensive equipments. How do you distribute healthcare to patients rather than patients coming to healthcare?
Mm.
And that's a very tough problem. You just can't deal with only instrumentation. You have to think about the biology, the chemistry of the chip. You have to think about data storage, everything else, right, in one roof. And so that caught my attention. I got interested in clinical sciences, like how, and it's a very different problem than just when we talk about basic science like biology and chemistry. So in terms of medicine, there are some concepts which are different, like what's a threshold of a test, uh, the concept of false positives and false negatives and things like that, which appear simple on the face, but when you need to dig deeper into that. And so then I read more about this. One of the extremely good thing that I actually was fortunate to be part of was MIT has this program called GEMS program, which I think is a brilliant idea. So what they did was they will select about 10 engineers through all of the MIT graduate programs, and we get to spend about a year and a half with the Harvard Medical School folks. So we take all their courses. We take anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, like almost like the doctors do dissections.
Hmm.
And so you really live in their shoes, and we even get to sit in the clinics. So doing that, I had a pretty good sense that this was the field I want to apply my engineering skills into. And Bob's lab is probably one of the most kind of lab working at the frontiers of medicine, but still being an engineer. So what we do is, and we can talk details about this, that when you have a problem, you can think it as an engineer, or you could think it like a doctor. Be like, how do I apply this so that it goes to the patients? And we call that translational medicine, and I think he almost invented the area of translational medicine. So whenever we create a new compound, we think about what's the toxicity in people, how much dosage we have to think about to get in, will a surgeon implant these things, right? So these questions are always at the forefront rather
Mm.
than the back end of our product. So I think that's why I love the lab, and I decided I should come here for my postdoc to get trained in this area.
Wow, this is amazing. I mean, this is so insightful. And the immediate question just pops up for me is moving from engineering to medicine. And you said that as part of the experience in the GEMS program, you were fortunate to get into Harvard Medical School, spend 1.5 years there. Tell me a little bit about your experience, being as an engineer, trained engineer, and then moving to medicine. How was that transition for you?
It was fun. I think that it was actually it was interesting. It was not smooth at all because I was going it about all wrong. So what happened interestingly, that I, even without the GEMS program, I started getting interested in biology. So the first course I took was immunology in my grad school second year, and that was a disaster. Well, like I studied immunology, but then the questions were on genetics and biochemistry, which I had no idea about. So I was like getting a B in these courses while I was getting A+ in all my engineering courses, and I'm like, oh shit, like I need to I need to study biochemistry. Then next semester I took biochemistry. Then next semester I took like genetics. So I almost studied these courses backward, as a biology grad student will do forward, right? They'll
Hmm.
study the easy ones and get the tough ones. So, but I think that just keeps it fun. I think the reason, at least I know many of my friends are in research, is because you get to learn every day. It's challenging. I hate to work in a field where I don't know anything more, where my
Hmm.
knowledge is almost a limit. And I think that this was a new frontier. It was challenging to know more. So it was a fun journey. The interesting thing about you brought about medicine was, I think that if somebody is, there's two things that's necessary, right? You need to have fun. You can't just study it because you need to do it, because it's very tough. You have to spend a lot of time on it. But more importantly, I think if you start seeing similarities of how the body is actually a big machine, and in medicine there are all these common principles that we engineers use, like you can imagine the heart being a pump, and if you start seeing through those lenses, you actually make everything make sense. Like, why do we have a high blood pressure? What happens when you have a high blood pressure? Why does your heart starts having a high load, right?
Hmm.
So there are a lot of common principles, because at the end of the day, the rules of physics that's govern the universe is governing everything else. Biology is just more complex. There's more cogs to the machine than like simple systems, but ultimately they'll all follow the same rules. So when you do deduce that to the fundamental principles, I think it's pretty exciting to kind of know that you can. This is how the whole thing is working.
Hmm. So what I hear from you is you think like an engineer and obviously consider body as this complex machine. And I think the example of heart was one really wonderful. A meta question around it would for you would be for me how so as you mentioned body as a machine and as a complex system. Uh, do you see that understanding a complex system like a human body, can we take the same ideas as we understand any other complex system from an engineering point of view? Would that scale well for a complex system like body or human being? Or we need to take a totally different approach to comprehend the complexity of the system?
So that's what I think we are still learning right now in our endeavor for science, because what has happened is medicine and biology was very almost more like an art in 1980s and stuff. And
Hmm.
as you have more of basic scientists get into the field, biology had a revolution. We do more of molecular genetics. Everything is we are understanding the mechanisms of things, and so there's been a shift in medicine as well. I think there's a lot of stress on understanding mechanism of how things work. Like just give you an example, like aspirin, when it was discovered and approved by FDA, nobody now still knows how aspirin works. It's still a mystery, right? We know it works. We know it works for different reasons. So there was 80s and 90s, drugs would be cleared by you do a large clinical trials. The doctors have a sense this works some way, and they'll give it. Still partly like that, largely like a lot of drugs, people still go by kind of symptomatic treatments. If you follow the case for COVID-19, many of the drugs that were given, we don't know
Hmm.
how like hydroxy chloroquine, I think, yeah. We don't know how it works. There are in vitro studies to show something of that order, but doctors were like, oh, we see some effect, let's just do a clinical trial. But recently, I think there's been a shift in thinking that any new drug that is being made, there's a strong need for you to show a mechanism. Why? How is this drug affecting? What it is affecting? What are the side effects of that? So you could manage side effects. And so I think in next 5 to 10 years there'll be a shift, definitely in understanding these complex this the body as a whole. There is, and I can, this is a whole rabbit hole. I think there is in general a bigger push to completely understand every molecular mechanism that is undergoing in the system. So previously, you can imagine there was this human genome atlas, right?
Hmm.
People sequenced the whole genome and they thought, okay, well, got it. We can sequence the genome, we'll know everything else. And then they realized, oh, that's not true. So recently, I think there is a big push for mapping the brain. But more importantly, now we have tools that we could understand genomic differences in individual cells. And so there is a new push by NIH in US at least on called the Human Cell Atlas. So people are sequencing every individual cells in the body and creating a whole atlas. So you can imagine that if you have a disease and you find some mutations, you can look at that atlas and you know what cell, where, how, and stuff.
Hmm.
And that is already kind of showing some benefits, because when initially it was discovered that the COVID-19 will bind to the ACE2 receptors, you could just go back to the atlas and you know all types of cells in your body
Hmm.
that would present those receptors, right? So I think it's changing. And to answer your question, that both um, clinicians and basic scientists and engineers as such are going to converge to a point eventually in the future where I don't see these barriers remaining. I think that these right now, when we think about, oh, a mechanical engineer or a chemical engineer or a biologist and stuff. Of course, you have your basic, because the knowledge has really exploded. You can't just get into one. But I think the approaches, the thinking process, everything's going to be very quantitative in the future. I think that's kind of my sense of the field.
Hmm. I really like how you brought all of this together. And I think this understanding that, yes, we have different domains and disciplines coming together to understand this. What I hear, and I take it a point away from your side, is potentially in the future, this all will blend together. There will be this more. reduction of barriers between these disciplines. I think this is also very fascinating, and it brings one question to my mind as you were talking about is how was your experience transitioning obviously trained as an engineer and moving to medical and understanding medicine. What did you find different in terms of thinking like a person who understands biology, who understands medicine, versus someone who is an engineer? Do you see any specific differences in terms of how each of this thinking addresses a particular problem?
Yeah, I don't want to generalize this and kind of stereotype people, but I'll tell you my experience from the people I've seen around me. One of the things that frustrated me as when I was in pure engineering department was I think that people understand in pure engineering departments like mechanical or chemical the problems in the non-living systems, right?
Hmm.
Machines, stuff, because they're simple. When they and then there's a lot of people working in biology actually, right? In US, outside US, everywhere. And there was an estimate that about more than 60% of researchers at MIT at this time are doing something with the life sciences or other. Just to show you, everybody wants to do work in biology.
Hmm.
The issue is, when um, you kind of don't understand what is an important problem versus what is not. And so I see a lot of tool development without necessarily a problem being present, right? So,
Hmm.
you're making a lot of hammers without nail. And that's kind of a common problem. I think it's kind of persistent because if the right now the funding model is you just publish and you get more money, it's not necessarily saying that can we have a patent, can we have a company, let's see where it's being applied or not. So people keep doing this. But there are only very few places, and that's why I love working in Langer Lab. And I think something I want to do in my career as well is to be um, kind of actually know the main problems in medicine. And right now, sadly, like the doctors know it because they work with patients. There are also certain nuances when you work with people versus when you have a inanimate object, because you can't do everything to them. Like,
Hmm.
say you have a device and you could in principle put it under the skin, or you could make a big surgery and put it in the abdominal space. People don't want the thing to be done in an abdominal space, although it would make all sense. It's their choice. So medicine is not only governed by pure science, but also governed by human choices. And I think that is something that the doctors understand and kind of appreciate. And I think working with them is a critical step for that. You would take your technology ultimately to the patients.
Hmm.
So I think that was my sense, and it was just a funny segue story on this. So after I finished, when I was doing the GEMS program, I got into contact with so many doctors, and I love actually I really have a lot of respect for the doctors because actually they are in the field making the difference. And I was like, you know what? Screw this engineering. I want to be a doctor. Like, I just want to do an MD degree after my PhD.
Hmm.
Terrible decision. My mom was very upset. But anyway, so I was like all ready to apply to med school. So I had like great mentors through the GEMS program. They were very big shots in HMS, the Harvard Medical School system. So I talked to them and I was like, David, so this guy David Sloan, who is an onco-immunologist, and I was like, David, so I'm deciding to apply. What is your advice on this? And he was like, look, Suman, I think you'll do very well if you apply. You'll definitely get in. But my sense is that you should probably stay in academia. Sorry, stay an engineer and treat mice. And I was like, why? He's
Hmm.
like, if you treat people, you're gonna get sued left and right. I'm like, why? Why is that the case? He got a very important point because he saw me in the clinics with him, right? And when I see, and what my interest in medicine was that I'll see a patient, and to me, he or she is a problem, right? There is a disease, and the disease is a problem, and I need to treat the problem. So I completely ignored the human factor. I was like, why is she not taking this drug? This drug will work. And she's like, I have like, diarrhea, blah, blah. I don't want this drug. Let me do this. And the doctors have to accommodate that. You just cannot. And I was like frustrated. I was like, just like, put her in a hospital, give her the drug, treat her well, make her well, and we'll release her. So I think that's the thing that he kind of observed. And I kind of got a sense of that too, that being a doctor is not just you apply the knowledge, but you also, a big, big, big factor is patient care. And that's
Hmm.
something I don't think we can replace very easily. But that's why you need to work around that as an engineer.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much for sharing this. This is so insightful. I made a note of it. This whole point about ignoring the human factor. I have several questions in that set, but I want to pin it on the side. But I want to come back to something which you mentioned right at the beginning when we said how was the transition for you. So I will definitely come to this part around future of medicine and essentially the role of patient care as you see developing. But I'm going to pin it for the moment. You mentioned something very interesting. You said that you were interested in immunology and you started obviously not doing well, and you said, oh, for that you need to understand biochemistry. So essentially, you started looking things from backwards. Or so if you want to understand this, I need this, and you go slice back in time, compared to probably someone who is studying medicine from the scratch. So you're building on fundamentals and growing up. How was that process for you about studying things in backwards? So figuring out this is what you need to understand this. How was that process for you?
Not ideal, but also I think it is exciting because I think that I don't know. I mean, I feel like if somebody gave a coursework to me, look, to me, why biology or immunology kind of attracted is because there are these exquisite machines that nature builds that are so fascinating, right? Like, even if you think about simple thing as a DNA replication, there are so many steps your mind will just spin around it, like how the proteins work. So I was attracted to that. But where the more simpler courses like just biology 101 or biochemistry, there's a lot of people will get angry at this. There's a lot of junk. I hate that. It's like when in engineering we would just solve like fluid mechanics, or in computer science you write hello world 20 times, right?
Hmm.
So I hated those, and so I think that it was fun because I entered the field from a more complex point of view. I always got entertained and excited at the same time. It was tough, but it was exciting. And then as I kind of went through my coursework became easier and kind of a little more boring. So it was fine. I don't think that I necessarily lost anything. I think it was fine because if I did the reverse, maybe I studied just the more boring parts of biology, I would have given up. I would have been like, this is just not like, this is too much of information. I don't need like all of the Krebs cycle and the NAD cycle and stuff. So I think this was okay as an engineer who was just doing it for fun rather than for my coursework. Yeah.
Hmm. But I want to actually go one layer down. I mean, for me, this is super interesting. And I'm trying to connect to what you're saying to essentially how people today are being educated, especially those who are trying to find alternate means to picking up information and understanding. For example, someone who has never been trained on computer science or engineering trying to go over YouTube and trying to grab open courseware from different universities and trying to understand it. So let me just take a backtrack to this. So one is, you mentioned topic about being fun. So you're having fun exploring something. So you found something that you need to know, but okay, for that you need something else, and you go to that, and then you go to potentially the source of that information, and thereafter, do you think this process, re- and I think, considering that you just mentioned that if you had started with biology 101, you might be getting bored. How does that help you to potentially think about future of learning things? So if you have someone who is interested to learn something, would you advise them to follow a similar process instead of starting with a one-on-one course, writing hello worlds and then building up? What would be your take in based upon your experience in this?
That honestly, I haven't given a very deep thought about it, so it's just very superficial
Sure.
thinking. um, I think it depends on how what you are going to use the knowledge for. I feel like, look, if this was my engineering course, I say I have a clean slate, I don't know much of science, okay, and this was a basic fundamental thing that I'm going to do regularly on, I would suggest go the traditional route, right? Because you need your fundamentals very strong.
Yeah.
But if it's something you want to increase your knowledge in, I think it's okay to be get to the outs. you could do from an outside to inside kind of a thing, right?
Mm.
Because then you know kind of the thick layer of knowledge, and you could pick and
Mm-hmm.
choose how much of fundamentals you need. So it worked for me because I'm still going to be using my engineering principles every day when I design my drugs or whatever systems I'm using this. What immunology or anatomy gave me was to identify important problems. And it is then up to my interest to go deeper and deeper and learn more and why this thing's happening. But I can
Mm.
stop at any point. I still got my information. So that's why it worked. But if I was going to be a biochemist and I have a lot of project in biochemistry, I should have rather go the other way around. I don't know. Does it make sense? I think
Yeah,
it's,
it does. It
yeah,
does. So I think what you mentioned about why do you need this knowledge, right?
yeah.
Are you are you are you interested to apply this information for something specific? So I like that as a kind of a starting principle. Essentially, oh, let me start from outside and then I go from outside to inside. And I think what you have is still the foundation of your engineering education, which you always use, the principles and techniques that you can always use and lean on, because you
Right.
still have something on as your primary understanding of systems built from ground up, built from the fundamentals. So I think it is very interesting, and obviously I agree with what you're saying, and we can probably explore this further in this conversation. But yeah, I mean, this podcast is again also about you, your journey. So what I'm trying to obviously get to is through these experiences of moving from a city like Calcutta to the US,
Mm-hmm.
studying and then trying to move your understanding, move your field to medicine and biology. Um, how do you see the type of challenges that you were facing being as an academic pursuing his doctorate in engineering sciences and then moving to this new field of drug delivery? How has been the transition on personal challenges that you faced between what you used to do and now what you do in your lab?
It's interesting question. I think there is both positives and negatives. Um, so let me, the typical. I think that one of the, what we need is more people who are interdisciplinary, and there is a big focus in U.S. and at least in the top institutions in U.S. to do to work at interface of disciplines. It could be chemistry and medicine, right? You could be physics and medicine, and medicine needs more people from outside, like basic scientists, to come in and do this work. So that's very appreciated. The problem that I have faced, I think still, I think the kind of community sorting out is making a career path for these people. Like for example, um, there are still, say I was a mechanical engineer. If I would have done a fluid mechanics path, I would have graduated with a few paper. I would have not have to do a postdoc or did like a 1 year postdoc and got into a department as an assistant faculty right away, right, with a
Mm,
few papers. Now, when you're doing biology or anything of that sort, now your path is different. You want to do a longer postdoc. You're going to get funding, and stuff like that, and then apply back. And now when you apply back, you are always questioned by these traditional engineering people that, oh, well, you had a longer postdoc. Why did you do that? Would you have all the resources that we can give you in the department, right? Maybe not. What kind of graduate students will do? What if they don't like the medicine in the field? So I think there is this all of engineering departments are going through this kind of transition phase right now. I think there is an old guard which doesn't like new thinking. They would judge you on that. Oh, you have done this so long. Could you teach fluid mechanics for us? So who's going
mm,
to teach fluid mechanics for us, right? And there are new people and new dimensions in research coming up, which I think they are not keeping up. I think the top institutions like MIT, Stanford's are good at that, but a lot of rest of the institutions are not, and I think they're very traditionalist, and so I think it's difficult to find a fit in the departments, right? And that's a big problem for a lot of people who are doing interfacial science because where do you fit? You're not a pure medicine, you're not a pure engineering and stuff. And some schools have done very well, honestly, in that regard. So I can't complain, but I see the field changing, but it's pretty slow. So I think that that is one area that I think is different. The other thing, it's I think it also needs to happen is when you do, and there's a new concept in US, is we call it convergent science, where you want to bring people from other disciplines like physics and chemistry and other exclusively for the purpose of solving problems in medicine. And not just, it's my pastime and I have 5 projects in chemistry but 1 project in medicine. That doesn't happen. You need to immerse yourself. So there's a whole idea of this convergent science. And the other issue of anything which you're doing convergent is to bring people of different expertise under one roof so that they can communicate. Like, I need to talk to an MD many times, or like, suppose the project that we are developing on diabetes, and we can talk about this. Well, the good thing was there was a surgeon on the team, so we know from early on that how the surgeries will grow, what's the best design, and stuff like that. If that wasn't the case, then we would have made something that would be completely invisible to put in the body. So not all places have these resources. So, if you're in a place that doesn't have a medical school, you might be just struggling to find a collaborator on what you're trying to build. So the ecosystem you're in is very important to create this kind of work that we do. So I think that's kind of my, 2 takes. And things are changing. Things are definitely changing a lot faster these days.
Hmm. And Suman, from your knowledge, from your understanding, was there a particular moment where medicine started attracting different disciplines to itself? Because my understanding would be, and I'm happy to be corrected, is traditionally it has been a very kind of clearly siloed away from the rest of the disciplines, like especially mechanical and other engineering sciences. Do you see, from your understanding and from your education, a set of these moments in time where you saw that, okay, that basically led to other disciplines coming into medical and especially medicine?
Yeah, I think that I don't know a lot about the history of medicine, honestly. I think I'm going to be out of my waters to kind of talk about this, but my sense, and it might be completely wrong, so take it with a grain of salt. It's been that um, it has always had people from outside come in. For example, if you think about orthopedics, things about people who design wheelchairs and stuff, there has been always been an interface with engineers, right? Doctors haven't been doing these things, but slowly things have changed, and there's been more engineers coming into almost all field of medicines in last, I would say, 20 years. And if I look at the history of US, for example, MIT set up its department called HST, which was Health Science and Technology, 20, 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And their whole sense was, they had a whole program called Medical Science, Medical Physics, where especially the whole sense was imaging. For example, MRIs and stuff. You need physicists to build them so that they can be applied. In Boston Children's, and Mass General Hospitals, they had a very strong engineering program, or at least people in imaging sciences. Engineers were coming in for a long time in medicine. In terms of actual drug delivery, I think the tipping points were 2 things. Specifically started with a lot of work by Robert Langer and a handful of people in US, honestly, would be in 80s and 90s, where you started adopting, because previously, and this is a story I think my boss, like Bob Langer, always tells all the time, that if you when he became a postdoc, it was very uncommon to do work in medicine as a chemical engineer. And what he kind of found out, he worked with a great person called Judah Folkman in BC, Boston Children's Hospital. And this guy was a doctor, but he was trying to bring in engineers to solve the problem of cancer, slow release molecules to prevent the cancer from spreading blood vessels. And what he kind of saw was the doctors would use all sort of polymers. For example, when you have a heart problem, they'll use like a lady's girdle or something like that, stretch it out and use it as a polymer to kind of prevent the heart. So there was no innovation on materials adapted for the purpose. They will adapt they will just take a material and the best material they have and then put it on an organ. but they were not creating new materials suited for it. So then he was like, could we design polymers and things that are specific for these things? And that was his whole career since then. So I think he has pioneered, and then many other people have pioneered. So now, as the drug company speaks these things up, right, there is more entryway for us as in kind of new generation engineers to kind of be appreciated and be like, okay, these guys can make a big difference, and kind of there's, I think the path is more smoother now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Suman, for sharing that. Suman, considering we now have probably a very high level view of what you do in this lab, what is your day like? How does a day look like, in a typical day look like, if you have a typical day working in this lab?
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know if I should tell that. So I have a very random schedule. I think it depends, and I think COVID has kind of also being a little bit interesting with these shifts and stuff that work. I try to come in the afternoon. I'm not a morning person by any means, unless there's a grant. I've not slept that night. Try to come in the afternoon, and previously or even now, I'll spend most of the time like catching up on meetings, hanging out with friends, having coffee. So it's almost like the evening social activities I'll do in the early days, and then when people leave by 6 or 7 is when I actually get to work. I think nowadays it's more of other administrative work, sadly, rather than actually bench work. I have people working for me, like we have 2 graduate students and a technician who kind of does a lot of the work, but kind of just managing them. But also, if it's an important experiment, I'll do it. But a lot of grant writing and kind of keeping tracks of other things, and planning new experiments, planning and just reviewing data, those kind of stuff. So I try to work more in the evening and the night. I think it's just less disturbing, less disturbance, less emails to reply to, less firefighting, let's put it this way. So yeah, so that's my schedule, and then I'll try to stay till like maybe midnight or 1, then come home and have a small snack or something, and then like work till like 2 or 3, and then go to bed. So not a great life, but but that works. That works for now. So.
Thank you so much, Suman, for sharing that as well. Suman, how has this, and I mean, focusing more on this transition, because I think the whole transition from your engineering sciences to medical is so interesting and so inspiring. How it has changed you as a person? Like, do you have now a different way of thinking, a different mental models on how you approach problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know if it has changed me as a person. I think, and I also don't know if it's just like more of maturing as you're getting older, right?
Mm,
I think there's 2 things that I have learned through my career. One is not get emotionally attached to your technology. You're trying to solve a problem, not be married to one idea and one technology. So that's important, because you need to evaluate with a clear head if something is going to work or not. So that's very important. The other thing is to kind of start getting some of these thinking like the doctors, like if you make something up, just do very early kind of planning on in the life cycle of the project. Is it something that is going to be clinically translatable? Is it something we can take beyond just a publication? And I think I try to apply to this filter. It doesn't always possible, because there are projects that are very early to predict what will happen with them. But I think that has kind of guided my project that I've been interested in. That if something seems like very gimmicky and it's not going to work I don't try to do that. I also very strongly believe that you shouldn't. The simplest systems work. If there is a tendency for a lot of people to over-engineer systems, right? Very complex things, 9 parts. And always tell if there's 9 parts and each have a probability of failing like 10%, you're going to have 90% failure rates, right? So it's not going to work. So I think that's very important. That it's you kind of understand that if it's hard for you to make it, it's almost going to be impossible for some other doctor to actually put it in a patient. So we want to have as little engineering as possible. The simplest design usually wins, and something has to be robust and durable that we want to advance in our lab.
mm. So, Suman, if someone who is listening to this podcast, perhaps an engineering student, and they wanted to also get excited, and they're getting excited, but from your experiences and your journey, and would like to get into medicine, and also just be as an engineer, try to solve problems in medicine. What what would you advise them, like where should they start, what should you do, and what experiences would that you would like them to have?
I think a lot of this is, and as I said, I think there is, if you're in the US, you probably already have a path forward from your university. There would be either a connection with a medical school or something else. And so try to work on a project with the medical school, try to find a lab that does a work with a medical school. So that'll be a normal thing. Outside the US, I think it's tricky, right? Because and that's one of my qualms about the system in India, where there's a lot of great opportunity for research, because the problems are very unique. But I don't think that the medical community does really research. I mean, it's pretty. Let's just get patients in and out kind of a system, right? I just don't know. Maybe this is my ignorance, but this is what my feeling is. So I don't know how somebody in India would kind of deal with this. I think there are at least a few professors in IIT that I know who are doing really cutting edge medical research. So I would say go work with them. But in US, it's just be cognizant. If there are opportunities around, if there are internships you can get in a hospital, do those things. And sometimes you just need to make a hard shift, in your career. If you really are interested in medicine, you've done the groundwork, then you identify a lab that you're interested in. Just don't be afraid. Make that jump. You'll be fine. I mean, that's what my suggestion is. Most of the time, we are afraid because we don't want to be out of our box, out of our knowledge zone. But if you don't make that leap of faith, you're never going to learn something new.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now I'm going to take back the pin which I left it on the floor, about um, the topic that we spoke about, around questions for you, especially how do you see the future of patient care? And to give you a context, you mentioned about how you saw it on the ground that, hey, this particular patient, if he can just give the medicine, it could solve the problem. But obviously the patient may have reservations, may have emotions, and doctor is not just fixing a problem, but they're also taking this holistic care of the patient. How do you see, in the age of modern medicine, the patient care would evolve? How do you see this potentially moving in the future?
I mean, you mean how would it change, right? Like, okay, I mean, I don't have a clear vision of that. I think that it's I can tell you that how medicine will change. I think medicine is becoming more of engineering the body than giving external factors into your body, right? I think there is very newer therapies where we can either put cells that will, produce all the drugs you need in your body, or we call it cell replacement therapy, protein replacement therapy. There is genome editing, which would be obviously revolutionary if that works in people. Eventually, they will work in people. So there's a push for that. Correct what is wrong, and I think we can treat a lot of diseases based on that. Um, then there's two sides, right? There's what's available to treat and how do you treat. I'm talking about the first part, which is what available to treat. So I think those drugs will change. Like right now, there's a lot of drugs which are we don't know, right, how they work, and I think those will change. The drugs that we know will work more, and there's a whole field of personalized medicine, and that was a big dream, and I just don't know if that has taken hold very well. But I think that will, at least in cancer, there is some sense of it because now you grade it. Many cancers like leukemia have very clear mutational patterns, so the doctors will sequence them and they'll be like, no, you are which pattern and which kind of drugs you'll respond to. Solid tumors, not so much. So some fields are definitely making a difference, right? We are trying to quantify disease states. And if you can quantify disease states, you classify people better. You just don't tell that they have a cancer. You can tell what kind of cancer, what are the mutations, because some lung cancer might look like pancreatic cancer with the same kind of mutations, right? Or something similar. So you need to treat them like that, not just as a lung cancer. So there's a sense of that, and I think it's going to change in that sense. Um, in terms of patient care, um, I think that I have not a clear sense of how this is going to change. There's a huge disparity. That's why I'm a little bit unclear. If you think about the first world, I think you already get extremely good patient care. There is the doctor to patient ratio is very good and stuff. If you look at the other parts of the world, it's horrible. It's just, I think, it's a patients are almost like a number. They come in and they get a bunch of medicines and go out. And so it's hard to predict how everything will move forward, right? I do see a lot of applications of AI into this field of medicine. There's a tremendous opportunity for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of the medicine, honestly, is on even before diagnosis, is to kind of just assess from what the patient is saying. You fit a couple of bills and you said this is your medicine, right? So those kind of simple correlations, I think you could kind of pass on to the AI to do, and then the doctor has to spend less time on trying to look at that. Um, but it's a perplexing question. That's why I'm kind of punting on giving an answer, because I don't know. Medicine is so much connected to social inequality, economic inequality, that I just don't see the whole field moving at the same time. There's going to be a huge spectrum. There are going to be people who will be treated like they're in heaven. They'll go in and they'll get all sort of advanced therapies and come out completely fine and not age and stuff. And there'll be people who will be still struggling for like basic infectious disease. So it's pretty wild. We need to think about, I think, social equity also in medicine in some sense. I don't know if that was an answer you were seeking for, but I know I it was just like being very impromptu with my thought process there.
No, it's perfectly okay. I mean, obviously we're not here. I don't want to hear like from you something that you had in mind already, but I'm just trying to see what comes to you mind first when you hear a
Yeah,
question
yeah.
like this, right?
It's no, it's that's just when you think about how medicine is advancing, there are two kind of things, right? There is very advanced medicine that we talk about, like CRISPR-Cas9 engineering. Think about these things will not going to be available to an average person in a third world country, because it's just going to be super expensive. Even I think it will not be available to a big population of United States. So yes, we are making this because this is great, and some people will benefit, but how much can we benefit? So I think we also have to think about, when we create therapies, um, is it going to, how can you maximize the impact of it? So for example, very common thing, immunotherapy, right, which has revolutionized cancer. You modify cells, your immune cells, to fight against it. Right now you take out cells from a patient, you modify this with a virus vector, and then you put them back in the body. Now that means that you cannot have two people mix their samples. You can transfer all sort of things into them. By regulation, you need to have completely different establishments to treat one patient versus the other. So it's an extremely expensive operation, and that's why it's very expensive to do it. Even in here, I don't know the cost, but it can go into millions to kind of even deal with that. I know somebody in India who did that. Very, very, very expensive, but they were already very rich people in India who did this. You can't imagine a normal person, who doesn't have insurance to even cover the cost of that. So could you think about ways that you don't need to engineer the cell outside the body, but you can engineer the cell inside the body? And I know a lot of people are working on that area. So you can inject some sort of a nanoparticle that goes in your body and affect your immune cells to express those receptors that you can engineer outside. And if you could do that, then it's going to be just one shot, like a one-shot chemotherapy, right? And now you can think about, yes, I can probably affect 1 million people affecting with this cancer with this injection. It's more equitable. So I think, as engineers, we also need to think about that aspect of medicine. The less engineered, the less challenging implementation and deployment, the more people in the world you can impact with.
Hmm. Thank you, Suman. This was really, really informative. I really appreciate you being candid and also open to, address ad hoc questions that I come to you with. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. We are almost at the rear end of our conversation. I wanted to see if you have like any recommendations for our listeners, especially on resources like books or blogs or podcasts or anything that you use um, to get inspiration, to learn something new. It may be completely out of the domain that you work with. It could be in general. Is there a specific book or resource that you really recommend people? You tell them to just go through it, irrespective of the work that you do.
Um, I am not a voracious reader, honestly. I hate reading my textbooks as well. I like lectures and things more. So I do, I have always listened to a lot of these interviews by Nobel laureates and other people, and just see their struggle. And if you see their struggle, you will actually understand that in science, it is not how smart you are, it is how persistent you are about a problem, right? You could be the stupidest person in your class, the last in your class, and be very persistent in your quest, and you will get there. So that's kind of the common kind of knowledge in the field. So I would say that, and then the other thing, I don't really have a book and resource I followed. I just followed what I had fun doing, and I was like, if life is worth living, it has to be that you need to be fun at what you're doing. And I have always followed that kind of guiding principle, be the next stage of whatever I've picked up in my life. And so I think that kind of have worked out. I've been having fun so far, so we'll see how long this jolly ride lasts, but we'll see. So I think that's my thing. Don't be afraid to take a chance, especially when you're young. I think you can have security and stability later in life, but when you're 30s and 20s, you should take chances. And listen to what makes fun. I don't think that we do the best when you're not having fun with something, and if you're having fun, even if it's hardest at the beginning, things will get easy later on. And I do listen to a lot of these people who are Nobel laureates and stuff, and just see people struggle. I think a lot of people tell nice stories that I was successful in the beginning and stuff, and that is not what I've seen. I've seen most of the
Mm.
people struggle a lot in the beginning, and I think it has all worked out at the end. So it is, and if it doesn't, it's still you had fun, right? So you don't lose so much. So that has been my kind of take on it.
Amazing, amazing. So thank you, Suman. This conversation is so stimulating for me, and I already had like bunch of notes that I want to follow up with you. Maybe at a separate time we can go deeper into that.
Sure.
What is potentially a right channel for our listeners to reach out to you if they have some questions, if they are curious about something?
Oh yeah, just email me. I think if you can, Vivek, just share the email. It's Suman Bose 85. I think, or you can find me on the internet as well. But yeah, you can just happy to answer any questions. Reach out to me through email. That's the best way. And I'll be happy to help you guys in whatever way I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Suman. I am so happy that we got a chance to talk to you. I personally connected with you last week after like almost 20 years. And I was able to finally also get you on the podcast. I'm so happy with that, and I'm also looking forward, cheering for you and being in awe with what you do with the work that you're doing in your lab. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's a pleasure, Vivek, and let's just keep in touch. I'm sure you should come visit Boston sometime, and I can show you our lab.
Absolutely. I'm looking
All right.
forward for that as soon this whole lockdown situation
Yes.
is in past. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Suman, and really appreciate your conversation today. And I look forward for having you the next time.
Great. Thanks, Vivek.